Hello and welcome to Systems Wise, the show that helps business owners and teams to solve their big sales, marketing, and systems challenges one episode at a time. You can watch the video version of this episode at getsystemswise.com. I'm Gareth Everson, and on today's episode, we're going to be continuing the theme around the topics that go with systems management. And today, I'm going to be talking about passwords, which is the fourth P in our set around the 5 Ps of systems management. On episode 33, I gave you an overview to the things you need to think about around systems management. Episode 34, we talked about the people in your business and how incorporating the right structures in terms of the way that you manage your people in your business can help you run it effectively or cost you a lot if you don't. On episode 35, we talked about the processes in your business and managing those effectively. And on the last episode, episode 36, I talked about the dovetail of platforms and having an overlap between the operational platforms and the customer platforms that are in your business and running those more effectively, ideally on as little software as possible. Today, I'm going to be talking about passwords, but a little bit wider than that, talking about the kind of access that you give to your digital assets and your digital platforms and the things that you use to run your business in an online sense. So let's get into it. As somebody that works with small business owners and their teams, if indeed they have teams, what I've seen over the last 10 to 12 years of doing this is this misplaced trust in many circumstances of business owners and their teams around giving access to critical software and systems in their businesses. Think about it this way. If your website went down irretrievably, or if your CRM became inaccessible to you, or your main source of leads, be it, say, Facebook or LinkedIn, became inaccessible because they were hacked or compromised, or you were frozen out of them, what impact would that have on your business? If you own your own house, there is not a chance that you would give keys to your house on any sort of permanent basis to somebody that you didn't trust implicitly. And yet in our businesses, often we can be in this scenario where we give the keys to important assets and platforms and digital things in our business to people that we have very little relationship with. It might be a marketing agency, it might be a VA, it might be an expert freelancer that we've hired to do something on our behalf with our software. And doing that and putting ourselves in this position where we're not in control of that security, and nor are we in control of the processes that person or that entity uses to manage security of their own devices and their own processes in their own business, is really foolhardy and can leave you exposed to the worst possible thing happening. And if you think that you'd be covered by some sort of cyber insurance as a result of one of these attacks or being compromised on one of these things, if you've given away the main access to be able to do that, then think again. A cyber insurance cover would not cover you for those types of things. So this episode is all about taking responsibility and being accountable to managing your digital assets and access to those digital assets such that you're able to continue to use them. This comes from a bitter experience. In the last year, a client and somebody else who's not a client but who I know and value highly have in effect lost their businesses due to being hacked, and hacked in a way that was thoroughly avoidable. So I want to take this episode to just share some of my experiences and tips and thoughts around helping you to think about closing some of those gaping wide doors that you've got, or that you're granting access to your business for people who are malicious and intent on causing damage to walk through. This problem has exploded in the same way that the amount of software and apps and digital resources that we have access to now as small business owners has grown in the marketplace. If we'd have been having this conversation 10 or 12 years ago, you might have only really been accessing maybe 3, 4, 5 different online resources or assets in your business to be able to run things. A lot of what you used 10 years ago to run your business was actually located physically in your office or on your laptop or not available in a wider sense. Anything that's available via the web is by definition accessible by anybody anywhere in the world, which has its benefits because you can hire people to help you from lower wage economies, VAs, to assist you do social media or video editing or things like that. But it also has its downsides in that it leaves you, unless you have proper security measures in place, it leaves you exposed to being hacked by these malicious entities. Just like we would do by way of protecting our house, it's far easier to stop somebody from encroaching on our physical property with stronger locks, with better alarm systems, with more secure setup of our property than it is to correct a problem of when we have had an intruder into our physical property. It's exactly the same in an online setting as well. Prevention is far easier than fix or cure after an attack. So let's think about some of the things that we should consider when it comes to protecting our digital presence online and our digital assets online. The first one of these that I want to focus on is the obvious one. It's how we manage our passwords. Now, you might have seen and been frustrated with different sites that require you to have a variety of different ways of entering a password onto them. You'll have entered a trusty password that you've kept in your mind and been told it's not acceptable because it doesn't have a number in there or a special character, or it doesn't have any uppercase letters in there, or it's using too simplistic words or phrases or numbers in there, and you've been told that it's not secure enough. That might have been a source of frustration to you, but actually they're thinking about protecting you. And I think we've gone beyond this point whereby we can use our first pet name plus our date of birth or the year of our graduation or something of that nature as our passwords. We're way beyond that. And thankfully, there's software that exists that help you to manage your passwords, but in a secure way. There are two that really spring to mind. One is called LastPass and another one is called 1Password. That's a number 1 and then password after it. And both of these services are subscription services that allow you to have in one place on any device that you've got, be it your laptop, your mobile, iPad, etc. They have apps or plugins or extensions that allow you to manage securely your full list of passwords for your different digital assets. Now that has 1Password access to it, so you need to keep that password particularly secure, but it gives you a means to be able to store securely a whole bunch of passwords that aren't just your pet's name or your graduation year or stuff like that. It allows you to have much more complex and more difficult to crack passwords for your digital assets. Now, they have various different algorithms that will prevent somebody from spoofing you and logging in as you on those password services. They'll have what's known as two-factor authentications and security protocols to stop people from doing that. And I'll say a little bit more about two-factor authentication in a moment. But what these password management services allow you to do is, without needing to remember all of your different passwords for lots of digital services, they keep it all in one place. And with that one login and knowing that it's you, they allow access to your Facebook, your LinkedIn, whatever service you're using to manage that password control. So that's the first thing. let's have stronger passwords that we use for all of our digital assets. Second thing, when we're using these services, they give you the capability to be able to share securely that password or that access with people that you work with. So instead of sharing the direct password, it shares if you like, a permission or a secret token for somebody to be able to use one of your access methods to get onto the service that you're giving them permission to access. Sharing the password, but without sharing the password. And you can set whether that person can see your login details or whether it's just allowing them that secret handshake, if you like, to be able to log into the software. And the great thing about that, instead of giving somebody your username and password to be able to log in to services that you want them to manage on your behalf, be it your accounting software or your social media or whatever it happens to be, it gives you a way to open that access to them, but also to shut that access off once you've stopped working with them. So you're not left in this position where, have I changed the password after I granted Bob access to my Facebook, for example? So that's a second line of defense that you have by using these password managers. Third thing I want to cover, and I mentioned it already, two-factor authentication is something that you should give due consideration to in whatever services you're using that have a means to do what's called two-factor authentication. Complex phrase, two-factor authentication, but what does it mean? It means that not only do you have a username and password, which is the first factor of authentication, but your two-factor, your second factor, is something that sits outside of that password. Now, it might be that you give them your mobile phone number and they send you a text message with a login code, and that becomes the second factor. So you've applied your username and your password, but then you also get a text message from a digital service that gives you a one-time password, a login code that you also use with that username and password. There are other ones where you install an app on usually your phone where it gives you an authentication token that expires. And that second factor authentication, once you've entered your username and password for a site, it will ask you, maybe not every time you log in, but certainly fairly frequently, it will ask you for a 6-digit code that you pull up from an authenticator app on your phone. And there are a couple of different providers of this service. A really popular one is the Google Authenticator, where you can store second factor access codes for different services. And the Google Authenticator service, when you bring it up on your phone, will have all of those services that you've set as available for two-factor authentication on there. And it has almost like a countdown timer for them, a circle that times out every 30 seconds and refreshes that 6-digit token to do that second factor authentication when you log in. Microsoft also has a service that does it, and there are a variety of other ones, but the most popular ones are the ones provided by Google and the ones provided by Microsoft to do this. It adds a little bit of a faff factor when you're logging into services, but the thing that can't be cloned by these hackers and these spoofers, or can't be cloned that easily, is the fact that it requires you to be holding that phone with the security that you have to access your phone in the first place, to be able to then access those services. So wherever possible, try and add this second factor authentication to your login to different services. Especially think about it on business critical software, such as your CRM, your social media profiles, your accounting software, your website, services like that. Having that second factor authentication to log in, that second means of access, is a really secure way of being able to protect your assets. And if you're inviting other people to become users of any of those services, that you're granting access to them to be able to access those for you, ensure that those third-party access users are also using two-factor authentication. Many of the services that now exist online have a default admin setting where you, as the admin user of those services, can require that any other users that get set up on those services have to have the two-factor authentication as well. A question that often comes up around this topic of two-factor authentication is, well, what happens if I change my phone or lose my phone or something like that? When you set up these services, and I'll use Google Authenticator as an example on this, when you set up these services and you associate it with your phone, they'll give you backup codes that you can use that you should store or print out or keep somewhere safe separately to your phone that allows you to have that transition between devices. So if you lose your phone or it gets wet and you can't use it or you don't have access to it for a period of time, you'll always have a backup mechanism that you're able to use outside of the Authenticator app. If you go to the show notes, wherever you're listening to this podcast, I'll include a link in there to a breakdown of some of the topics that I've talked about on this episode and some of the resources that I've mentioned so that you can process in your own time what this means for your business. And if this is particularly challenging to you about how do you think about that and how do you manage it, just drop me a note. Best way to get me is on LinkedIn. If you go to askgareth.com, that will bring you directly to my LinkedIn profile where my DMs are open. Let's just have an interaction on there and I'll guide you through any of the questions that you've got in relation to this topic. So an important topic that we've covered today, critical for the ongoing security of your business. You don't want to be left exposed or vulnerable or in a situation where your most important business assets aren't available to you. Because as I mentioned at the start of this show, I've seen first and second hand over the course of the last 12 months, 2 different businesses really suffer as a result of this in a way that was thoroughly avoidable. So without wanting to end on a really sour note, focus on getting things set up in the right way and you'll be well positioned to be running a business that can last years into the future. On the next episode, we'll talk about products and keeping your product assets secure and systemized in your business. So I'll see you for that. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Systems Wise podcast. Remember that what we learned today builds more value if there's a plan to take action on it tomorrow. So head to getsystemswise.com and check out all the resources and training on the software and systems that you need to build a scalable business without breaking the bank. And if you value the show, please help others to discover it too by leaving us a review wherever you get your podcasts or by sharing a link to an episode on LinkedIn or wherever your finger does its scrolling.